welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DeRienzo. Joan Musi is on assignment. She will be back next week, and we have a great show really on tap for next week. So make sure you're here. Those who need their fix of Joni, she will be back next week. So she apologizes for not being able to make the show tonight. But we do here have a great show lined up, and our guest is Pat Korte. Hi, Pat. Welcome to Let Them Talk. And Pat is an organizer, I think a founding organizer of the new Students for Democratic Society. And we're going to talk about what SDS is for those folks who aren't as old as I am, and as young as good researchers as these guys are, who dug up this past history, this incredible history of the 60s and early 70s, and turned it into a new organization. And we'll talk about the purposes and the mission of that organization, and we'll take your phone calls, and our number, of course, is there, 212-757-1538, right there on your screen. And this is Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DeRienzo. So, Pat Korte, you are a student.
Yes, that's correct.
And you're a student at the New School?
I'm a first-year student at the New School, Liberal Arts College.
And now you're not spending all your time studying, obviously.
Well, I'd say it's part of my studies. I'm an organizer for Students for Democratic Society at the New School, and we started a chapter last semester. This is my first year there. So.
Well, let's go back a little bit in history, because I think some folks, as I said earlier, probably don't know what SDS, or Students for Democratic Society, is. So, Students for Democratic Society, what is it?
Well, I'll start with the background on the original SDS. SDS was founded in 1960. It became the largest student organization of the past 50 years. In 1969, with membership ranging from 100,000 members to 250,000 members, plus thousands of supporters.
Sure.
The group split from the League for Industrial Democracy around between 1959 and 1960 and became its own independent organization, seeing the university as an institution for social change and using it as a vehicle for social change. And SDS was built around the principles of participatory democracy, the idea that people should have control over the decisions that affect their lives and the resources on which they're dependent. And it saw politics as something positive, as something that could bring people out of apathy and isolation and into the greater community, and providing a means of finding meaning in personal life. And it continued for nearly 10 years and focused around issues ranging from civil rights to student power to ending the war in Vietnam.
And what happened in the end to the old SDS? This is obviously not around. This is a new organization.
SDS split in 1969 due to a variety of disputes that took place. The Progressive Labor Party, which was a Marxist-Leninist party, sent its cadre.
I haven't heard anybody say that for a long time.
Yeah.
A Marxist-Leninist party. Okay.
Yes, and they sent their cadre into the organization with the intent of basically taking it over, and that resulted in major disputes at their last convention, and it created two factions, and the Progressive Labor Party was kicked out of SDS, and then another faction came about that eventually would go on to become the Weather Underground, which was an organization.
We'll get into that. We'll talk about that later, but go ahead. That's another direction. Continue with the SDS history.
So SDS officially disbanded as a national organization in 1969, and local chapters stuck around until around 1972. And the organization, reached its height between 68 and 69, and it was probably one of the, was one of the largest left organizations we've seen in the United States over the past 50 years, and definitely the largest left student organization.
And it was motivated mainly by opposition to the Vietnam War, or a panoply of issues?
SDS was initiated, again, it was split from the League for Industrial Democracy, which was kind of
Sounds like a union group.
It was a social democratic liberal organization that had been around for some years before. Like John Dewey was one of the involved in the founding of League for Industrial Democracy, as were other well-known liberal intellectuals. And then
there was a bit of a split there in the beginning as well, because the direction students were going.
In that SDS wouldn't explicitly they didn't embrace anti-communism or anti-socialism, and that was the primary reason for the disputes in the beginning of the organization. That SDS, members like Tom Hayden and Alan Haber, who people may or may not be familiar with, were involved with the SDS when it was still affiliated with the League for Industrial Democracy, and it split because they weren't anti-communist enough for the League for Industrial Democracy. And SDS was founded kind of.
That was almost a requirement of any sort of popular movement in order to deflect that kind of criticism in that era.
And they refused to accept the idea that America was on the side of right during the Cold War. They were saying that both sides were
the new SDS, or the SDS
at the time.
Yeah.
And then SDS was also one thing that should be mentioned is SDS was founded as a support organization for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, support organization in the North. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was mainly focused in the South, and they did the freedom rides in the early 60s and were involved in the civil rights movement. So SDS was initially, it had a background in the civil rights movement. And
how did, well, we have a call. You want to give it a shot? Well, let's see how courageous we are. You're on. Hello. Are you on? Hello? No, I guess not. Well, I could try again. Well, let's talk about, I think this is all very interesting, and so there was a connection to SNCC, and how about the Yippies?
To the Yippies. Well, the Yippies...
the Youth International Party.
Well, Abby Hoffman and Jay Rubin and the other folks involved with the Yippies, they were involved in the levitation of the Pentagon in 1967, and then the Yippies were more formally founded.
They ran a pig for president.
They ran Pegasus,
right,
as a presidential candidate in 1968.
Were they part of SDS?
Some Yippies were, some Yippies weren't. The Yippies...
were they antagonistic, some, to SDS, or was it the same type of thing that was going on with PL?
I'd say it wasn't the same as PL, but there were definitely disputes within SDS, and some people were very interested in a very serious organization and appearance, while other people were
some people wore ties and suits.
Yes,
some people came with bushy hair and a beard and smoked a little weed.
Interested in the counterculture.
Right, the counterculture and all those kind of things, the music. All right, hi, you're on. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, you're talking about student activism?
Yes.
Yeah, I was actually a student at Kent State during the shooting there.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
What's your name?
I was there.
What was your name?
When the ROTC opened fire on the students.
Sure.
And yeah, well, I was getting fucked in the ass.
Oh God, I saw that one coming. You're on. No, you're not. Oh well, we just have to be courageous to take some of these calls, so we'll give it a shot later on. Let's talk a little bit more about student activism. Well, now we have the 60s. All right, now there's a quietus. I mean, obviously there hasn't been the same level of student activism since 1972, at least since the late 1970s and 1980s. And matter of fact, I just saw, and I wanted to bring this up because I don't know if you've seen it, and this relates to our discussion, because there was an article in the paper today and all over the news that there's a report that says young people today are the me generation. Have you heard that? I've heard that.
I have.
I've heard that before. In other years past. It's not the first time that slag has been made. That somehow the youth today are more narcissistic. They're just thinking about themselves, and they've been raised in this newfangled way of spoil the rod and spare the child. That modern parents raise their kids, and that this has made them impossible to stay in relationships, no real commitment, as compared to students, let's say, 30 or 40 years ago. Is that true?
Well, I'd say one thing that needs to be corrected is, there always has been student organizing since SDS fell apart. I don't think, for a number of reasons, it's ever reached the level that it did in the late 60s and early 70s, primarily because the war in Vietnam, mobilized so many people. But you did have the women's movement of the 70s and the environmental movement of the 70s and 80s, and then the anti-globalization movement of the 90s, which did mobilize a large number of students. But again, not to the extent that SDS did. Also, a lot of these groups are focused on the single issue, while SDS embraced a broader vision.
All right.
And yeah, I'd say
so. There were like small, localized movements of young people, but nothing even approaching a national organization. What's the difference now? Here we are now, half a century later. What's different now? Why are students organizing
Unfortunately
nationally?
Well, in that respect, I think it's just people are getting more frustrated. Unfortunately, not a whole lot's different in that we're again at war.
Sure.
With
Maybe that's the reason.
with a poor nation, of course, another unpopular war in which young people in the United States are being sent to fight and die, or be maimed, in which thousands of Iraqi people and Afghani people are being, murdered. There's a declining standard of living, in the United States. There's, the rate of poverty is increasing. Things are getting very horrible in this country, and to an extent that we haven't seen in a while. I think that it's just manifesting itself in a new way with the Bush administration, in that this, these fascistic tendencies
So
that
George
are
Bush
manifesting themselves in.
George Bush is this generation's Richard Nixon. He's doing the organizing.
Yes, he's helping with the organizing to a large extent, and
When did the new SDS begin, and how did it begin?
it began in January of 2006, and
So it's just barely 1 year old.
yes, we have more than 250 chapters.
250 chapters in 1 year.
Yep.
Well, I thought we were going to take a call, but I guess not. Oh, there it is. Let's be courageous. Whoop. Hello. You're on.
Yes.
Go ahead. What? I guess he didn't say anything. Hello, you're on.
You might, wow, you won't be AI anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm glad you're a BAI fan, though, but thank you. And I used to be on WBAI. That's someone who remembered. Thank you very much. Again, there's a number, 212-757-1538. Our guest, Pat Korte, who's a organizer at New School Students for a Democratic Society, what we're calling SDS, a new incarnation of an old organization with a commitment towards peace and social change and development. And Pat, let's go back a little bit and talk about 1 year ago, January 2006 till now, and you have over 250 chapters.
Yep. There's a variety of reasons SDS started. It's rooted in that at the time there was no major national organization of students that was oriented towards radical left tendencies.
Sure.
So a friend of mine, Jessica Rapchick from North Carolina, and I were involved in several other anti-war groups, but that's what it was limited to, anti-war. It wasn't embracing a broader vision of society.
Sure.
And we began to discuss the way those organizations were structured internally and the values they were putting forth. And
How did you get together?
we were involved in the organization World Can't Wait, and both
Sure,
of
we've
us,
had folks from Elaine Brower was here just a couple weeks ago.
and we we began discussing the way we wanted to organize ourselves. So we wanted to build an organization that put forth the way society should be structured, because we felt it was much more positive and progressive, in that there are a variety of issues to organize against, yet at the same time we're also putting forth what we're for.
So you wanted to do something, even though you met in the World Can't Wait, which is an anti-war group that's main demand seems to be to impeach Bush,
Yes.
organize people towards that effect. And you decided at meetings that you wanted to do something a little different.
We wanted to unite, we wanted to build a national student movement that would outlast the war in Iraq and outlast the Bush administration, and put forth positive values for the way society should be structured.
And how did you come to the idea of reviving Students for Democratic Society?
After a while of studying the history of student organizing, both nationally and internationally, obviously we couldn't study that without coming across SDS, and essentially SDS embodied what we wanted to put forth. Well, we're students, we wanted to build a student organization for a democratic society, and we began discussing what would happen if we called our organization SDS.
Well, I teach in the school system. I talk to a lot of young people and bright kids who do a lot of reading, but very few, if any, have ever heard of Students for Democratic Society.
Well, I'd say that it's in the collective mind, though, of the American public, for even people who didn't live through that era necessarily.
Really,
And
it's sort of in the collective unconscious.
Yes, I would say that it's something
You started looking, you found it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we were
I see.
discussing, in that by tapping into that
That's interesting.
collective.
Was there a main book? Was there any source that was?
There is SDS, a profile, and SDS. by Kirkpatrick Sale,
Right,
which is an amazing account of that, and as well as
Kirkpatrick Sale, great book, SDS. If you can find it, it's out of print.
it's
right?
out of print right now, but I'm sure with what's going on right now, it'll probably
Right.
enter back into.
Let's give it a shot. Okay, we're going to be courageous. You're on. Go ahead.
Suck mine, penis!
We tried. Try again? No. All right, let's move on and discuss what the next step is, because you guys had just had a conference here in New York, right?
Yes, we did.
And it was interesting, some of the people I've seen, like Mark Rudd. I wonder if anybody out there remembers Mark Rudd. Remember Mark Rudd? He's still around. He's a school teacher in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he is involved in SDS. And you're gonna, next thing you tell me, Kathy Boudin is showing up. I mean, like,
well,
these people are still around doing stuff, right?
they are. We've received a lot of support from older activists, both
Mm-hmm.
former members of SDS and generations that came after
Sure.
that. And Mark Rudd's a big supporter. His politics have changed quite a bit, but he's still a dedicated leftist and a big supporter of SDS. And,
Right. He was a member of the Weather Underground.
He was. He was originally. Well, he
Let's
was
get
the-
into that now. The Weather Underground came into SDS, and they had a specific kind of politics
Yes.
at the time.
I guess what could be called a third worldism. They were their primary focus was support for the Black Panther Party and support for third world revolutions.
Now,
in
I saw
Vietnam
that
and Cuba.
documentary about them, the documentary movie, Weather Underground,
Yes.
and it claims that they were responsible for numerous attacks of a violent nature against property, not against people, against property, although we have a famous building on 11th Street that's a different building
Yeah.
than used to be there.
Right across from the new school, ironically, where
There you go.
3 members of the Weather Underground died,
Right.
and that changed the course of their politics to a large degree. And yeah, one thing that should be looked at is what Mark Rudd said, and I've talked with Mark about this a lot, and he was saying, they embraced the violent politic. They were calling for violent revolution,
Sure.
and then even that they still called for that, but their tactics changed to a degree. They made the decision, okay, well, we'll only attack property. But even that, when talking with Mark about this, Americans view the destruction of property with greater anger sometimes than they would a bomb falling over, a home in Iraq. And I think that's something.
Property and people's property rights are sacred in this country.
Yes, and that
And
is
you're
more
attacking-
sacred than
yeah.
human life. And
That's unfortunate.
and
So it
so-
wasn't the best thing to do even then. It didn't-
and it isolated them to a huge degree.
What do you do to make sure that the politics, because young people, these Weather Underground guys are 20 years old too, and 21 years old, and young people are full of vim and vigor and all that idealism. They haven't been jaded like somebody my age.
Well,
how do you deal with that kind of energy?
I think the best way to look at it is, we need to have a strategy, and our tactics should not guide our strategy. Our strategy should guide our tactics.
Very good.
And therefore, our strategy is building a large, progressive, radical movement in the United States, and therefore our tactics should fit within that strategy.
Let's give it a shot, all right? Well, we did, but the person then hung up. Hi, you're on. Go ahead.
Hello?
You have a question?
Hi.
Go ahead. Do you have a question?
Hello?
Do you have a
How are
question?
you doing?
I guess not. All right.
Do
Do you have a question?
Hello?
No, they don't. We tried. Okay. Well, tell us about the conference that you guys had in here, the Northeastern Conference. What was the purpose of the conference here in New York?
We had a regional conference at the New
Yeah.
School with chapters from the Northeast, and the main purpose was to begin hashing out a structure for our organization, not nationally, but we've essentially what happened was we issued a press release in January 2006, and chapters have begun forming. So now what we're trying to do is bring those chapters together and form a formal organization. So we were forming a formal organization in the Northeast region, discussing how that would be structured.
Do you have a national leader now? Because the original SDS always had a national chair.
No, we don't. We
Do you want that, or you're heading in that direction, or is there conflict even about that? Or
there's debate about that. I'd be more in favor of a national federation of chapters in which national secretary might not even be necessary. Simply a national council on which all chapters are represented would be more appropriate, I feel. So
make it a little different, because that's what made it something to fight over when there was one guy in charge, and people started to see that one person in charge started to have a whole organization behind them. They became a powerful individual person.
And I think that's one thing we want to focus on collective effort. And, you know,
That was the era,
avoiding-
maybe. Do you think that was part of the era of the old SDS, or
Well,
they made some mistakes?
I'd say that's an era in the 60s in general, in the new left of the 60s and 70s. One of the big mistakes was, you know, the personality cult and creation of
Right.
you know, the radical
there were
persona.
plenty of them.
That, yeah, and that people abused that, and
Uh-huh.
it create. You know, I mean, the media latches on to people to begin with, but
Sure.
you know, you
Like a Mario Savio type of person. Was he actually
well,
ahead
I'd
of
say
SDS at this point?
he was involved with SDS, but I
Yeah.
mean, even more so than
He
Mario
was a free
Savio.
speech
You
guy.
had, you know, you had larger media heads. You know, like I mean, you had, you know, Tom Hayden, who's
Tom
great,
Hayden,
but
yeah.
like he certainly became, you know, in the popular mind, the embodiment of like SDS rather
Didn't he
than.
date Jane Fonda at one point?
He did. They were married at one
They
point.
were married, so they had a tremendous amount of. I mean, you're talking about star power.
Yeah.
You know, so the head of SDS could become a big star.
Yeah.
That's very sexy in a society. So you're going to try and avoid that?
I think we need to avoid that because I think, I mean, certainly, again, like the media will interview certain people more so than others, but you know what we should be doing is looking for, you know, collective effort. And
Although here you are becoming a star on television in Manhattan.
Yes.
It's almost hard to fight it, you know, when it happens. So we all have to be prepared for the day when you're thrown into. But I think that's a lot different than you know some of the stuff I used to see, the crazy stuff that I used to see of groups trying to come in, you know, wearing masks and stuff and seizing the podium, and you want to avoid that kind of stuff. And what I've seen, unfortunately, at Pacifica Radio, which is a lot of sort of like the left eating its own type of thing,
Yeah.
you know, like almost as soon as someone rises, everybody like launches at them and tears them down, which is also so American, you know. How are we going to get past that? You're working with some of the veterans. Right? What's that like? MDS, right? Movement
well,
for
there's
Democrat?
a project within SDS to start a movement for a democratic society. So to start a non-student division of SDS focused on participatory democracy, and we're working with you know, folks like Al Haber and Mark Rudd.
He was the first.
And
Al Haber was the first.
Al Haber was
chair.
the first chair of SDS.
Where was that?
That was in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Right. Is that where they came up with that statement, the Port Huron
The
statement?
Port Huron Statement, that was the founding document of SDS released in 1962.
Do you have anything like that you're working on? For this SDS?
Something like that may come out someday soon. Hopefully, you know, I think we're working on a statement of principles, and that was one of the things we were discussing at the regional conference.
Great. And let's talk now in the minutes we have, 5 or so minutes. What are we going to do? Like, what is SDS's action plans? Because they're basically an action organization when you get past all the bureaucracy we're talking about now.
Yes, I mean, as far as our plans, you know, one of our primary issues is ending the war in Iraq, and one of the things that has been discussed is, you know, putting the pressure on the Democratic Party, not on, you know, Bush or the Republican Party, because at this point, Bush isn't going to get impeached. Bush is going to run the course with the war in Iraq, and he's going to, you know, he's going to want another president to be the president that lost the war in Iraq.
So you want to like criticize the Democrats?
Well,
that makes you radical.
I'd say that's what needs to be done, because I'd say it's not that we're criticizing them, we're calling their bluff. If they truly want to end the war in Iraq, I mean, you have Hillary Clinton saying, you know, I'm opposed to this war. I want this war to end. So, you know, you can either push Bush to end the war, you can elect me president, which is no guarantee, and it completely overlooks the simple fact that Congress has the power to cut funding, that we can cut funding, and people have this absurd notion that by cutting funding it will leave troops out in the desert naked or something. You know, that, you know, the point is we cut funding and the troops will be brought home. That's what's going to happen.
Pat Korte is our guest. He's an organizer for Students for Democratic Society, and you're with us on the television.
Hey,
Got a question?
yeah, your guest, you want to smoke a little weed from a pond?
So do you get that kind of thing? I mean, do they think that all you SDS guys, all you want to do is smoke a little weed and express the counterculture of the 60s?
Well, I mean, if people want to assume that, they can, but, you know, they should have a conversation with us and look at the work that we're doing. You know, there's a variety of projects taking place, from, you know, divestment campaigns to, you know...
Divesting from where?
Well, there's divestment campaigns in universities regarding, like Department of Defense, DARPA, you know, Israel. There's a variety of
How about the Middle
campaigns
East? What's
taking
what's
place.
SDS's position on the Middle East?
Well, as right now we have no national position on, for example, Israel and
The
Palestine.
Israel-Palestinian thing.
Though I think it's a general consensus within SDS that if Israel continues to go in the direction that it's going, that its future isn't too bright, and that it's not wise to destroy your neighbors, because it's not the positive way to create relations.
How about the recent build-up towards an Iran war? It seems to be.
And we are in absolute opposition to that as well.
Is there any responses being worked on for that, or is
there's
are we
been
going to close down all the campuses? Or?
There's been discussion around that, and again, that's there's the necessity to build that national
Sorry to put you in
structure
that spot. I know. I don't think you
Yeah.
want to announce we're going to close down all the campuses here on Let Them Talk. You heard it here, maybe, but no, we have not announced that. And we have a couple of minutes left. So, but you do plan actions.
Yes, we do. We're planning a campus moratorium on March 12th. Excuse me, at the new school, focused around the
March
Iraq War.
12th moratorium. And there's a protest in Washington as well, right?
March 17th, there is the march on the Pentagon. And SDS will have a block at that as well.
If people want to learn more about SDS, where should they go on the internet?
They can go to studentsfordemocraticsociety.org or newsds.org.
Newsds.org and
Yes.
studentsfordemocraticsociety.org.
Yes.
And is there emails and ways that people can get in touch? How about if folks who are on one of the campuses here in town are watching, they want to start a chapter?
You can email us at info@newsds.org.
info@newsds.org. Have you had any problems with some of the colleges?
Yes, we have. At Pace University here in the city, there's been a huge battle going on regarding free speech that has actually provoked a response from the administration, a fairly unnecessary response, simply regarding the distribution of literature on campus.
Yeah.
Saying that if it's not approved, then they don't
Approved,
have,
they have to have a little
have
university
a stamp from the university that students don't have the right to distribute that. And in the spirit of democracy and the spirit of values that this country is supposedly founded on, we believe that democracy requires a free exchange of information and ideas, and that as soon as someone has
You heard it, Pace. Come on. It's the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. We have half a minute. How do you want to tell folks anything in the last 30 seconds of the show?
I think that there's a lot of hope for social change in this country, but it's not going to take place. We don't have any delusions. No change is going to take place until a mass movement is formed and until people begin to see that mass movement materialize. No change will come about in that. A lot of people saying you're naive, nothing's going to change out of this. Well, nothing will change if people don't join us.
And things changed. The old SDS was pretty effective, even though it went down in flames. It was pretty effective in getting the message out, wasn't it? All right, Pat Korte, thanks a lot.
Great.
Very good. We'll see you next week on Let Them Talk.